Yeah, the question of anxiety and depression is just, it's so massive today. Everyone feels alienated, and so many people really struggle with this. And I think this is one of the paradoxes of this world of psychology that has now kind of had a boom in the past 100, 120, 130 years. While psychology has helped us to understand ourselves better, in many ways it's actually done just as much damage as good. And I think the main way that it's done damage to us is it's caused us to believe that however we feel and whatever we think is really important, and that we need to think more about ourselves. And really, the more you think about yourself, the higher degree of anxiety and depression you're going to have. The way to stop having anxiety and depression is to stop living in your own head and stop thinking about yourself so much and stop relying on yourself so much. So whenever I have parishioners who come to me struggling with a lot of depression and anxiety, I usually give them a little list of things to do. And the list isn't all that complex. The first thing I tell them to do is to go exercise. I tell them to do that actually first. Exercise at least 30 minutes a day, pretty vigorously. Science has shown us that 30 minutes of vigorous exercise a day is as good as or better than almost every single medication there is for depression on the market. Just getting out of your own head and getting the blood pumping and flowing is a really good thing. Number two, I typically tell them to go build, fix, or clean something, which means do something where you can see the results of your own work. You know, if you don't know plumbing and you have a sink that's broken, go buy a book and learn how to fix it. And it may be a frustrating experience, but that feeling of, that sense of accomplishment when you look at the fact that you fix something is a big deal. But even if you can't do that, especially if you're married, go clean a room. Go clean a room, so much so if you're a man, so that your wife walks in and is stunned and so pleased. Declutter is a big part of that. Declutter and clean, but do something where you can see the results. Number three, go pray. Again, at least half an hour. Go pray. Preferably the Jesus prayer is a good way to do it. If you're really in a lot of despair, the Psalms can be very helpful, but go pray. And when you pray, make sure that prayer is really an encounter. Don't just go read the prayers. Don't go say the prayers. Pray the prayers. Really be with Christ. And then number four, find something, again, if you're married, for your spouse, but if not, for someone else, find something that you can do that's really meaningful for someone else. Go live for someone else. You've lived for Christ in prayer. Now go live for your neighbor, your spouse, your family member, whoever it is. If you do those four things, this is my typical advice to, again, it's typically men who come to me with this issue. I tell them, do those four things. Exercise for half an hour. Do something that cleans or fixes or repairs or builds something that you can see. Pray for half an hour and go do something meaningful for someone else. And then I tell them, once you've done those four things, then go ahead, go sit on your couch and be as depressed as you want to be. And they always laugh when I say that because they know, before even practicing it, they know, well, if I do those four things, I don't think I'm going to be so depressed. Exactly. You're not going to be so depressed. You're living for Christ, you're living for others, and you're not so in your own head. I think this concept of self-love is really destructive. You know, when Christ says, love your neighbor as yourself, a lot of people will interpret that and say, see, you can't love others unless you love yourself first. I don't think that's really what Christ was calling us to, though. I think the way that he's calling us to that, and I've looked at a lot of patristic commentaries, I have yet to find a father who talks about how we need to love ourselves first. They usually focus on the other part, that we should love others. How much do we love ourselves? We love ourselves so much so that we do things for ourselves without even thinking about it. You don't have to remind yourself every day, oh, I better feed my body because I want to keep going. I better give myself rest. I better go brush my teeth and watch. You don't really have to think about those things. They're just automatic. They become thoughtless. I think that's the type of self-love that we want. The one that doesn't really think of itself. But as for like an active loving of yourself, I really don't think that that's consistent with the Christian message. The Christian message is, if you want to be fulfilled, forget yourself. And in fact, Saint Silouan and Saint Sophrony talk about loving Christ so much that to the world, it looks like self-hatred. It's largely what asceticism is we afflict the body, not because we're anti-body and not because we hate ourselves, but because we love Christ so much. We love our neighbor so much that we really don't give ourselves any thought. So what's the way to be fulfilled? Empty yourself. And it's really key that people understand this. Humility is not hating yourself. It's not looking down on yourself. It's not beating yourself up. It's not afflicting yourself. Humility is to empty yourself. It's a big theme I talk quite a bit about. And that's that the point of Christianity and Orthodoxy is not to be a good Christian. You're never going to be a good Christian in many ways. Christ promised that. No one is good but God alone. The point is to be an empty Christian. If you can empty yourself out of egoism, which is where a lot of this self-love movement comes from, if you empty yourself out of egoism, then suddenly your heart becomes an empty vessel that can be filled with the grace of God. And that's what makes man fulfilled. So I don't think self-love is really the path that we need to follow. I think that's a dangerous path, and I think that it's way too easily twisted to become greater egoism, greater selfishness, greater bitterness, to the point that, as we talked about, people are defining their own sense of truth. I think the way is to empty yourself out. Is there a way that we can aspire to be greater, to be better than ourselves, and still be a humble Orthodox Christian? And I would say that the answer to that is absolutely. Absolutely. Orthodox Christianity doesn't say that we want to become empty in the sense of becoming nothings, but rather that we want to take the gifts of God and we want to make them flourish as much as possible. So if we are fulfilled, the real question becomes, what is my heart yearning for? If you need, let's say you're an attorney, if you need to be the best paid attorney and the most respected attorney in the city, there's something disordered in your heart about that. But if what you really need to do is follow Christ as best you can and be the best man, in the sense of a Christian man that you can, and in that, you're striving to take the gifts that God has given you and live them out to the best of your ability, then I think it's a much healthier path. Suddenly, you're not filling yourself with worldly things. You're just simply trying to take those gifts and utilize them the best you can. But they need to be aimed in a virtuous way. Once you cease striving for virtue, you're going to destroy yourself in those things. And that's why you need to be cautious. And that's why, frankly, you need a spiritual father to guide you in those things. So you can ask those questions. Is it worth me striving for this promotion? Is it worth it for me to strive for this new position? Is it worth it to do these great things? And the question comes down to your heart. What is your heart guiding you to? If this is going to destroy you, then no. This is why fame is so dangerous. It's why you see people in Hollywood who are so miserable. I think what's going on in the world today is really a crisis of identity. The more I think about this, the more I pray about this, the more I read, the more I live as an Orthodox Christian, the more I'm convinced that this is really a crisis of identity. And we're trying to figure out who we are. And it goes back to the same sin as we see in the Garden of Eden. It's trying to be like God without God. That was Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve didn't have this idea that they were going to sin against God and be separate from him. They were told if you disobey him and eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll become like God. That's what they really wanted. And so in trying to become like God, they ended up disobeying God. They're trying to become like God and closer to God without God. And again, it goes back to that thing that we talked about, that if sin means to turn away from God, you can't get closer to God by turning away from him and going the other direction. That's exactly what's happening in the world today, is that people are saying, how can I become more of who I really am? And we're called to be gods by grace. We're called to be, to unite with God, that all that God is by nature, we will become by grace. But how can I do that in my own way? How can I do that apart from the commandments? How can I do that apart from this life of purity and righteousness that I've been called to? And so it comes down to the simple question of pride. Can I forge my own path and then have all the fruits, have all the rewards, have all the glories that God has promised for me, even though I turned against him in the process? And in doing so, the world has kind of become mad with this. We've become crazy. And essentially, you're trying to take a creation and make it depart from the Creator, who is not just the Creator, but the image of the one that we're fashioned after, and come to good results. How can you do that? It's impossible. It's impossible. So I think this is what's happening in the world today. Everybody wants to live for purpose. I think Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning was absolutely right about this, that when man lives with purpose and meaning, he thrives. But when he lives without purpose and meaning, he's just going to fall apart. He's going to commit suicide, whether literally or figuratively, he's going to commit suicide. But I don't think we've done a good job as a culture. In fact, I think we've been antithetical to this. We've done the exact opposite of asking what makes for worthwhile purpose and meaning. I think worthwhile purpose and meaning is, firstly, it has to be based in truth. If we're living a lie, what's the purpose of it? It has to be based in truth. Purpose and meaning, secondly, it has to be unchanging. Because if my purpose and meaning is a certain way today, but changes tomorrow, then why do I want to live out that purpose and meaning today when it's not going to last? And then third, it has to extend beyond death. Because if my purpose and meaning are going to die with me in the grave, then what does it matter in the end? None of it matters. Now, I came up with that list years ago, and it always felt a little bit dry to me. It always felt a little bit sterile. And then I realized something that's really important. that even if we have all these three things, if we have purpose and meaning that's based in truth, that's unchanging, and that extends beyond death, the reason it feels sterile is because man is made for love. And man is made for love, to love and to be loved. A circular relationship of love, which means purpose and meaning has to be based in truth, or be based in love. Now, think about that for a second. If it's based in love, it can't be impersonal. It can't be based in ideology. It can't be based in ideas. It can't be based in philosophy. It has to be personal, which means there's only one figure who fulfills all four of those. There's only one person, because truth has to be based in now a person, and that's Christ. Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Christ is truth. Truth is not a concept. It's not an idea. It's a person. Christ is truth. Christ is unchanging day to day. Christ has destroyed death, and Christ loves us. This is the only path to the fulfillment of man. And I think that as long as people are rejecting that out of pride because they say, I don't like what Christ calls me to. He won't let me just say, I want to define truth for myself. I want to forge my own path. I want to do whatever things. Well, that's true. Out of love, he lets you do that. But you can't demand the same rewards when you depart from the path that he laid for us.